He said it before she had both feet on the ground. "I'm not looking for a wife," Cass Grady told her, standing in the middle of his Wyoming yard, with his arms crossed and the kind of expression that didn't invite disagreement. "I need someone who can manage the boy." Mina Colbert had traveled 4 days by rail and 1 more by wagon to reach the Grady Ranch, outside of Sheridan, Wyoming territory. She had read the letter he'd sent through the placement agencies so many times that the ink had blurred at the center fold. "Need a capable woman. Steady, practical. Can cook and keep accounts. Boy 8 years old, recently lost his parents. Will not tolerate dramatics," she had written back the same afternoon. She set her carpetbag down in the yard and looked at him directly. He was perhaps 38, lean and sun-weathered, with eyes the color of creek water in winter. Not cold exactly, just very still. "Then show me where he sleeps," she said. Something moved in his face. Not warmth. Something more like the involuntary recognition of a person who has just met someone they expected to be different. "Floyd will get your trunk," he said, and walked back toward the barn without another word. The ranch hand named Floyd, a short, slow-moving man with a permanently startled expression, retrieved her trunk without complaint and led her up the porch steps and through the front door. She stood in the entry hall and took in the house in silence. It was a good house, solidly built, 2 stories, with enough space that it must have once felt full. The kitchen was large and clean in the way that things are clean when no one has touched them in a while. A child's coat hung on a hook by the door, too small for anyone currently living in it. On the mantelpiece in the sitting room, 2 framed photographs sat side by side. A man and a woman, young, and between them a boy perhaps 5 or 6 years old, grinning broadly at whoever had been behind the camera. There were no photographs of Cass Grady anywhere in the house. "Where's Oliver?" Mina asked. Floyd scratched his jaw. "Up in his room, ma'am. He don't come down much." She put her bag down in the room Floyd showed her, clean, spare, a narrow bed and a window facing east, and she took exactly 3 minutes to feel the full weight of what she'd stepped into, the distance she'd come, the boy upstairs who wouldn't come down, the man in the barn who'd made it clear she was a utility and nothing more. Then she went to the kitchen and started a fire. The first morning, Oliver appeared in the kitchen doorway at 6:30. He was small for 8, dark-haired and serious-faced, wearing clothes that fit him correctly, but had the look of things chosen without consultation. He stopped when he saw Mina at the stove and stood there with his hands in his pockets and his jaw set in an expression she had seen before. Not on children, but on men, the expression of someone who had decided not to need anything from anyone. "Breakfast is almost ready," she said, without turning around. "Biscuits and gravy. You can sit wherever you like." He said nothing, but she heard him cross the floor and pull out a chair at the far end of the table. Cass came in from outside at 7. He looked at the table, set neatly, nothing elaborate, just functional, and he looked at the boy sitting at the end of it, and for just a moment something passed across his face that she could not read. Then he sat down and poured his coffee. The 3 of them ate in near total silence. Mina did not try to fill it. She had grown up in a house where silence was either comfortable or dangerous, and she had learned to tell the difference. This one was neither. It was just empty. A house where 3 people sat together and had not yet learned how to occupy the same space. Cass pushed back from the table when he was done. "I'll be at the north pasture until sundown. Oliver stays on the property." "Understood," she said. He left. Oliver looked at his plate. Then he looked at Mina, quickly sideways, the way children look at adults when they're trying to take a measurement without being caught. She looked back at him calmly. "Do you like horses?" A pause. "Yes." "Your uncle's got a gray mare in the east paddock. I noticed her when we came in yesterday. She looked like she had opinions about things." Another pause longer. "Her name's Thistle," he said. "She bit Floyd last week." "That does suggest opinions," Mina agreed. The corner of Oliver's mouth moved. It was not a smile, but it was where a smile might live if one decided to show up. She had been at the ranch 11 days before she found the ledgers. She had asked Cass about the accounts on the 3rd day, because the supply ordering system she'd found in the kitchen clearly hadn't been updated since spring. He'd told her the ledgers were in the office off the sitting room, and she could look at them if she wanted. He said it the way people say things they don't actually expect to be acted on. She looked at them. They were not a disaster. Cass was organized in the way that competent men who are going through something difficult sometimes are, the basic framework holding even when everything else was falling. But there was a gap she noticed on the second evening of reviewing them, a bill of sale for Oliver's parents' land, registered to the Grady name as it should have been, tagged with a notary she didn't recognize, and below it a notation that made her read the line 3 times before she was sure she understood it. Mineral survey pending. Timber and coal rights contested. See Griggs' correspondence. She found the correspondence drawer. She found the letters. The name was Beaumont Griggs. He was Oliver's maternal uncle, brother to the boy's dead mother, and he had been writing to Cass Grady since April, with the particular tone of a man who had decided on an outcome and was working backward to justify it. The letters began cordially. As Oliver's remaining maternal family, concern for the boy's development, a city environment might offer. By June, the tone had shifted. I must respectfully note that the courts have historically given significant weight the question of a stable domestic environment. The last letter, dated 3 weeks ago, was brief and very clear. Beaumont Griggs intended to file a petition with the territorial court for transfer of guardianship. Mina sat with the letters in her lap for a long time in the lamplight. From upstairs came the faint sounds of Oliver not quite asleep. She thought about the mineral survey notation. Oliver's parents' land, a parcel to the south adjacent to the Grady Ranch, had been his father's homestead claim. Coal or timber value would make that land worth considerably more than its surface, and Oliver, at 18, would inherit it outright. She thought about a man who had waited until his sister's body was barely cold before he started writing letters to a Wyoming court. She drank her tea and went to find Cass. He was in the barn. She stood in the doorway. "You need to tell me about Beaumont Griggs." He stilled. He'd been working on a piece of tack, and he set it down slowly, with the care of a man managing himself. "Where did you find the letters?" "In the correspondence drawer, where you put them." A long silence. "That's not your concern." "It is," she said, "because a petition for guardianship transfer is going to require the court to assess Oliver's home environment. His home environment is me right now. So yes, it's my concern." He turned and looked at her across the length of the barn. His expression was the closed, flat one she had learned, meant he was deciding how much to give. "Griggs has money," he said, "and a house in the city, and a wife, and he's going to walk into that courtroom and tell a judge that this ranch is no place for a child." "Is there a lawyer?" "I wrote to one in Cheyenne. He says the case is arguable, but I'd need—" He stopped. "A proper domestic situation," she said. He looked at her steadily. They'd look at a man alone with a boy, and they'd look at a man with a wife and a household, and they'd know which one they preferred. It was the first time he had admitted, even sideways, why she was here at all. "How long have you known about the mineral survey?" she asked. The change in his expression was small but immediate. "What do you know about the survey?" "Enough to think that's the real reason Griggs is filing, not Oliver's welfare, the land." Cass was quiet for a long moment. Then he sat down on a hay bale and he said, for the first time without his hands giving him somewhere else to put his attention, "Daniel filed that survey 6 months before he died. Found a coal seam on the south edge of the property. If Griggs gets guardianship of Oliver, he controls the land until Oliver's 18, she said. "Daniels will gave me the ranch," Cass said quietly. "Gave Oliver that parcel. He trusted me to hold it for the boy. He was looking at the ground. He trusted me." The barn was very still. She could hear Thistle shifting in her stall. "When does Griggs arrive?" Mina asked. "Week from Tuesday." "Then we have 9 days," she said. "I need to see the full land survey, Oliver's parents' original homestead claim, and anything you have in writing from your lawyer in Cheyenne. I also need to know who in this county knew Daniel well enough to speak to his character." Cass stared at her. "You're not a lawyer." "I kept books for a dry goods cooperative in Cincinnati for 6 years, she said. "I know what a fraudulent claim looks like, and I know how to document a pattern. The survey notation, the timing of Griggs's letters, the specific legal language he's using. This isn't a grieving uncle. This is someone who has thought this through. And the only way to beat someone who has thought something through is to outthink them." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said the same thing people always said when they had stopped arguing with her and hadn't quite admitted it yet. "I'll get you the survey." Oliver found her at the desk 2 mornings later. She didn't hear him come down. She had learned that Oliver moved quietly, the way children do when they've gotten used to not being noticed. He stood in the doorway and watched her for a moment. "What are you doing?" he asked. "Working on papers about your father's land," she said without looking up. "For the judge. Is somebody trying to take it?" She looked up then. He was standing very straight, and his face had the careful composure of a child who has recently learned that adults keep things from children in order to protect them, and has decided this is not an arrangement he finds acceptable. "Your Uncle Beaumont would like to have you come live with him in Philadelphia," she said directly. "He's going to ask a judge to agree. Your Uncle Cass doesn't want you to go. I'm helping him make the argument that you should stay." Oliver looked at the papers spread across the desk. "Can I help?" She looked at him steadily. He was 8 years old, and he had lost both his parents, and he was standing in a doorway asking if he could help fight for his own future. And she thought that Daniel Grady must have been a very particular kind of father. "Yes," she said. "Sit down. I'll show you what we're doing." He sat down. She showed him. Beaumont Griggs arrived on a Wednesday, not a Tuesday, which told Mina something useful about him before he even spoke. He was perhaps 50, carefully dressed, with silver hair, and the manner of a person who expected rooms to reorganize themselves around his arrival. In the parlor of the Grady ranch house, with Mina sitting across from him and Cass standing by the window, and Oliver conspicuously absent upstairs, the room did not reorganize. It stayed exactly as it was. "Mrs. Grady," Griggs said pleasantly. He had done his research. "Mr. Griggs," she said, "thank you for writing ahead." "Of course," he glanced at Cass. "I hope we can approach this as a family matter." "We can approach it honestly," Cass said from the window. "That's the only way I know how. Naturally, my concern is simply for Oliver's welfare," Mina said. "Yes, you've mentioned that in your letters. Specifically in the letter from June, where you noted that the courts give significant weight to domestic stability." She folded her hands on the table. "I've been reviewing the homestead documents this week, Mr. Griggs. The land survey your brother-in-law commissioned last year is quite thorough. Were you aware of it?" A pause, very small, but she had been waiting for it. "Daniel mentioned it," Griggs said. "The coal seam on the south edge of the property is particularly interesting," she said. "A territorial engineer I corresponded with told me it represents significant potential value, the kind that would mature considerably by the time Oliver reaches 18. She looked at Griggs steadily. "The kind that a guardian would be well positioned to manage in the interim." Beaumont Griggs sat very still. Whatever he had expected from this meeting, it was not this. "I don't know what you're implying," he said. "I'm not implying anything," Mina said pleasantly. "I'm noting the timing. Your first letter to Cass was 3 weeks after the mineral survey was filed in the county records, which are public documents, as I imagine you know." The sitting room went quiet. From upstairs came the sound of Oliver moving across his floor. All 3 adults were aware of it. Griggs picked up his hat and stood. "I'll see you in court, Mrs. Grady." After he left, Cass stood at the window and watched the wagon go down the road. He was quiet long enough that Mina began to wonder if she had moved too fast. "He'll move quickly now," Cass said. "Yes, so we need to move first." He turned from the window. There was something in his face she hadn't seen before. Not the flat-guardedness she'd learned to navigate, but something more open, unsettled in a way that was different from its usual stillness. "Mina," he said, and it was the first time he'd used her given name. They both heard it. "I know," she said, "but later. Right now we write to the lawyer in Cheyenne." "And to the county court," he said, picking it up without pause, and she noticed that too. The way he'd started doing that, finishing the thought alongside her, rather than waiting at a distance from it. He stopped with his hand on the doorframe. "Daniel would have liked you," he said. He said it like a fact he'd just noticed, not something he'd planned to say. He liked people who didn't waste time being afraid when there was work to do. She held his gaze. What was he like? And something in Cass Grady shifted, the way a door shifts when someone finally leans against it from the right direction. He came back into the room. He sat down, and he talked about his brother, the specific, particular way people talk when they've been holding a person inside themselves for months with nowhere to put them. The way Daniel laughed, the way he'd shown up at Cass's door 7 years ago with a wagon and a new wife and a plan to homestead the adjacent parcel, and how Cass had told him he was a fool, and how Daniel had grinned and said probably and built the house anyway. She let him talk for a long time. She asked questions when it seemed right and was quiet when it didn't. Outside, the wind moved through the eaves of the ranch house, and Oliver eventually fell asleep upstairs, and the lamp burned low between them. And when Cass finally stopped talking, the silence that followed was a different kind than she'd found when she arrived. The hearing was held in Sheridan on the second Friday of November. Mina had not expected the room to be full. It was full. In the 3 weeks between Griggs's visit and the hearing, Floyd had told the story of the parlor confrontation to 2 men at the feed store, who had told their wives, who had told the rest of Sheridan. 4 families who had homesteaded near Daniel Grady's parcel showed up with the air of people who had been waiting for a reason to show up. Oliver sat in the front row beside Floyd, straight-backed and serious, wearing his best clothes and holding in his pocket a loop of gray horsehair braided from Thistle's mane, which he'd explained to Mina that morning was for luck. Cass and Mina had a lawyer named Prescott, rangy and methodical, the kind of man who read a document twice before he touched it. He had reviewed Mina's case file and said, with the air of someone making a professional assessment rather than a compliment, "This is the most organized file I have received from a non-lawyer in 20 years of practice." "Does it help?" she'd asked. "It wins," he said. The judge was a territorial appointee, not easily impressed. He listened to Griggs's argument, the city resources, the settled household, the superior opportunities, with the patience of a man who had heard this shape of argument and knew what it was built from. He listened to Prescott's counter with the same patience, the mineral survey timeline, the correspondence, the documented pattern of a petition designed not around a child's welfare but around a child's land. He asked questions. Prescott answered them. Mina answered too about the financial documentation, plainly without embellishment, because the facts were enough on their own. When it was over, the judge looked at Oliver directly. It was the first time in the proceedings that any adult had looked at the boy rather than around him. "Son," the judge said, "this ranch where you're living, is that where you want to be?" Oliver sat very still. Then he said, "My dad built that house. My mom planted the kitchen garden. Uncle Cass taught me to rope last summer." He paused. "Thistle bites people she doesn't like, but she lets me brush her. And Mrs. Mina makes biscuits the same way my mom did, except she uses a little more butter." The judge looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked at his papers. Guardianship remained with Cass Grady. The mineral survey was entered into protective record, with a notation that any future claims against the parcel would require federal review. Beaumont Griggs was invited to correspond through proper legal channels if he wished to arrange supervised visits. He had not, as of the date of writing, taken them up on it. On the evening after the hearing, Oliver sat at the kitchen table and ate 3 biscuits and explained at length to Floyd why Thistle had bitten him and how the situation could have been avoided. Floyd listened with the expression of a man receiving critical information. Mina washed the dishes. Cass sat with his coffee and said almost nothing, but the silence was different now, the comfortable kind, the kind that didn't need filling. When Floyd took Oliver upstairs, Cass stayed at the table. "I haven't known what to do with this house," he said, after a while, "since Daniel and his wife died. I kept coming home to it, and it felt like the wrong thing to maintain, and I couldn't explain that to anyone because it doesn't make sense." She dried her hands and sat down. "It makes sense," she said. "It's hard to take care of something when the person you were taking care of it for is gone." He was quiet. "It stopped being just mine," he said. "It became Daniel's too when he built next door, and then it was all of us together out here, and now it's mine again and I don't." He stopped. His jaw tightened. "I forgot how to want things for myself. I just forgot." She thought about the house as she'd found it, the functional coldness of it, and the way it had slowly changed. Not dramatically, not with grand gestures, but in the particular way things change when someone consistently shows up and pays attention. The kitchen smelled like food again. There were vegetables coming up in the back bed she'd cleared in October. Oliver came down to breakfast now without being called. "You're remembering," she said. He looked at her across the table, and she recognized the look by now. The one that had more than one thing in it at once, the careful man deciding what he was allowed to feel. "Mina," he said. "Cass," she said. He reached across the table and put his hand over hers, not briefly, not by accident, deliberate, the way a man reaches for something he has decided to stop pretending he doesn't want. "I'd like to do this right," he said, "if you're willing to let me figure out what that means." She turned her hand over and held his. "I came here with one trunk and a carpet bag," she said. "I'm not going anywhere." He exhaled, long and slow, the way a person breathes when they've been holding something for a very long time and have finally set it down. Upstairs, Oliver's voice floated down, declaring with great authority that he had found his missing book, and it had been under the pillow the whole time, not under the bed, and Floyd was heard to express appropriate amazement. Subscribe to Rusty Love and follow this story all the way to the end, and drop a comment right now. Tell me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this one travels. The first hard frost came in December, and Oliver woke Mina to see it, standing at her bedroom door in his socks at 5 in the morning with the expression of someone delivering urgent news. She pulled on her coat and went to the window with him, and they stood together in the cold blue light, watching the world go white. "Does frost hurt the beans?" he asked. "The ones I covered will be fine," she said. He considered this seriously. Then he said, "Thistle doesn't like cold mornings either. She was in a mood yesterday." "I know," Mina said. "I heard about it from Floyd." Oliver's face did the thing it did now, the thing that wasn't quite a smile but was getting more like one every week. "Floyd's scared of her," he said, with the calm satisfaction of someone who was not. Downstairs, she heard Cass moving in the kitchen, the familiar sound of him starting the fire and putting on coffee, the particular rhythm of a man going about the morning in a house he had remembered how to inhabit. Oliver heard it too, and without saying anything further, padded off toward the stairs. She stood at the window a moment longer. The frost lay across the yard in the early light, covering everything in the same thin, indifferent white. The fence posts, the barn roof, the bare kitchen garden, and the trail of small footprints Oliver had left in the grass when he'd come to find her. She had not come to Wyoming expecting anything. She had told herself exactly that on the train. No expectations, just forward motion. She had been right, and she had been wrong. She went downstairs. Cass was at the stove. He looked up when she came in, and the look was the one she had come to know, the one that needed no translation, that said what Cass Grady could not yet say easily, in words, and probably never would, not the way poets did, and she had long since decided she did not need him to. She could read the look. She had learned his language, and she was finding, to her quiet and considerable surprise, that it was one she had always known how to speak. "Coffee's ready," he said. "I can smell it from upstairs," she said. He handed her a cup. His fingers were warm from the stove. Outside, the frost held the world still and bright and beginning, and inside the fire was burning, the same as it had been since the first night she came home to this house and started it herself.